Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Annelies van Eynde. I work for the Flemish Construction Confederation, and I'm here today to tell you a little bit more about the traceability and quality management system we have been developing the last 4 years within the HISER project. The goal of the traceability system, the quality management system, is to provide quality assurance to the recycling companies who are treating the waste coming from your demolition work. Quality assurance, which is for them, of course, very important if they want to produce a high-quality recycled product. As you will see in the presentation, we focused the system on the stony fraction of the materials, which are used to produce recycled aggregates, as it represents, of course, the largest part of the construction and demolition waste. But the tool can easily be adapted for other kind of materials, which I also will explain during the presentation. The traceability system should not be confused with a track and trace system or one of a kind. It's really it should be seen as a quality management system, a system to manage quality of the waste materials coming from a selective demolition, to give quality assurance to those who need it. But I would like to start first with some numbers and to explain why here in Belgium, more specifically the Flanders region, there was a need for such a system. So today we are here in Belgium, very small, densely populated country, and even though we are a very small country, we have 3 regions, each with its own environmental legislation, which is not always very easily to work with. And if you take a look at the Flanders and Brussels region, we have no or almost no quarries, so there is less competition of primary materials. We have a landfill ban for recyclable fractions. We have high landfill taxes for those fractions that are landfilled. And the situation here in this region makes it that we already recycle a big part of that construction and demolition waste. We reach very high numbers or recycling rates. Over 90% of the waste is already being recycled. Bit too far. Well, in Flanders, the construction industry is responsible for more than 60% of the total waste produced. As I said, 90% of the construction and demolition waste is recycled, and if you go take a look at the stony fraction, used to produce recycled aggregates, we even reach rates of 98% of recycling. We also recycle 95% of the excavated soil. That's due to a landfill ban for soil, except of course if you can prove the soil cannot be treated. Of course, then there are exceptions. So in numbers, we already are doing a good job in Flanders. But what about the quality? Because of course, quality is a necessary condition for recycling and trust. Why is quality management important? Well, we all speak about a circular economy recycling products, but if the end user has no trust, no confidence in the recycled product, he will not use it, and then recycling becomes an ending story. To create a market for a certain product, you need to have the confidence of the end user, but to get the confidence of the end user, you need a good quality product, and thus it's a circularity on its own, of course. So we need quality as a condition to promote recycling, to make people use the recycled products and have, of course, use those secondary materials instead of the primary materials. In Flanders, we already have we have regulation that should ensure quality of recycled products. When you take a look for the recycled aggregates, we have end-of-waste criteria. We have specific regulation for crusher, which is focused on ensuring the quality of the recycled aggregate itself before it's put on the market, which is done by external organizations, an external certification body. But although we have these regulations in place, still a study in 2012, and other studies have shown as well, there still is a problem with the quality. There still is too much physical contamination within the recycled aggregates. Physical contamination, wood, plastic, or other materials that may hamper the recycling of the product, the use of the product. But also, and more importantly, there is still too much asbestos found in the recycled aggregates. 7% might not seem a high number, but if you put it into the rates that are produced, in 2012 we produced between 10 and 12 million tons of recycled aggregates. Well, if you count there 7%, we are talking about 800,000 to 1 million tons of aggregates contaminated with asbestos. And that is a real problem, because if you're going to use it, you spread it all around in the environment, and your problem that was maybe small becomes even larger at once. So this study showed there still is a problem with the quality of the recycled aggregates. And the conclusion of that study was, well, if you want to further enhance the quality of the recycled aggregates, then there is a need for action at a site. A crusher crushes the stones. He has no influence on the quality of the stones delivered at his gate. So if you want to enhance the quality of the recycled aggregates, you need pure waste, pure stony fraction from the demolition site that goes to the crusher, that is delivered at his gate. So action at site, selective demolition, should become the common practice. What happened then? Well, due to the study performed in 2012, the Flemish government made some modifications in the regulation, not only the environmental legislation, but also in the regulation for crushers, with as a goal to create a financial incentive for selective demolition. They did not want to make selective demolition mandatory. No, they wanted the sector itself to see why it is important, creating a financial incentive for those who do good. They get rewarded with lower costs. So how did they create a financial incentive for selective demolition? By a modification in the acceptance policy at a crusher, saying that they mandatory that have to make a difference between low-risk material and high-risk material. There's low-risk waste and high-risk waste, the stones, of course, stony fraction, where low and high risk have nothing to do with if it's contaminated or not. A low risk and a high risk are linked to the fact, is the origin of the waste known? Do you know where it comes from, how it was collected, and thus the risk that those stones will lead to contaminated recycled aggregates, is it low or is it present? Also changing the fact that when you have a low risk material, when you can accept it as low risk, then the way the waste should be processed by the crusher is in a continuous process with tests limited to critical parameters. So whereas the high risk materials, as the risk is present that maybe the recycled aggregates, because you don't know anything about the source, the origin of the waste, that there is a real risk that a contamination will be present. You cannot always visually spot it, of course. Well, there the regulation for crushers was modified, that waste has to be analyzed more severely to make sure there is nothing in it. Making that there will be a difference in cost, of course, because the processing cost for high-risk material, if you compare it to the cost for low-risk material, is much higher as well. And today on the market, we see differences, because this is already implemented in Flanders. We see differences of 6 to 12 euros a ton, high-risk compared to low-risk materials. Not only did they change the acceptance policy, low and high risk, and the financial incentive created by it, but in the regulation they also said which streams can be accepted as low risk material, and all the rest is high risk. And what is a low risk material? The origin of the waste is known, so there you have the link with the Construction and Demolition Waste Management Organization, an independent organization, saying that when the waste comes from a selective demolition that was traced and followed up by that external independent organization, well, that waste can be accepted by the crusher as low risk and processed at a lower cost. That's why already in 2014, before any standard procedure was written, Traceability was founded by the sector itself. It was founded by the Flemish Construction Confederation in collaboration with all the other people, all the sector represented in the chain, the Belgian Demolition Association, FPRG, which is the association representing the crushers, and ORI is the federation representing the consultants, the engineers, the experts in the system who will play an important role in the system as well. And since August 2017, we are recognized by the Flemish government to actually perform what we have worked out in a HISER project. So what is Traceability? Construction Demolition, independent waste management organization. What are we going to do then? Well, it comes to the fact we are going to certify the selective demolition process. We are going to hand out a certificate of selective demolition, of course, on certain conditions, if a traceability system has been found, a document, so the crusher knows, okay, this waste I can accept as low-risk material. And what does it say, this document? It says, well, this waste comes from a selective demolition based on a high-quality, destructive pre-demolition inventory, and where during the demolition process, it was checked, there was a follow-up on what happened with the waste materials, what happened with the hazardous waste materials, but as well as the non-hazardous waste that shouldn't end up with the stones as well, as they could hamper the recycling of the stony material. So in this way, the certificate we will deliver guarantees the origin of the waste and guarantees as well that it is free of contaminants. It guarantees the quality of the waste, and thus the waste can be accepted at a lower cost by the crusher. So you have to go to a traceability system to get that certificate to make sure the waste can be accepted at lower cost. So there is the financial incentive. As I said, it's not a mandatory system. The financial incentive should be enough to make people use the system. But how are you going to trace construction and demolition waste? And these procedures were worked out in the HISER project. Well, everything starts with knowing what is in the building that is going to be demolished, as David already said. A pre-demolition inventory, a high quality, just not an A4 with some notes on it on materials present. A high quality pre-demolition inventory is your first step, knowing what is in the building, hazardous, non-hazardous waste, where the hazardous waste, specifically for the hazardous waste, where is it located? That's essential information to prepare your demolition works, because if you do not know where the waste is, how can you correctly and safely remove it so it does not end up with your stones? Not only is an inventory important to know what is present, so you know what to trace, of course, it's also for the building owner a very good document, because if he does not know anything about his building during demolition work, many surprises will occur, price will go up, etc. It happens every day. By a good knowledge of what is in the building, you can have less surprises during the demolition works. Of course, he should be seen, the pre-demolition inventory should also be a part of the tender for the demolition works. So demolition contractors have to give set their price on the same basis, and thus the cost for the correct removal and safe removal as well of the hazardous waste has to be taken into account. And then you get less risks and less speculation amongst demolition contractors as well. So this is the first step in the whole system, knowing what is present so we know what to trace, the pre-demolition inventory. During the next step in the system, when the demolition works start, the whole traceability system is focused on what happens with those waste materials. Are they selectively collected? What is their destination, final destination, etc.? So you follow up, you track the removal of the hazardous waste as a priority, of course. We do not want hazardous waste materials ending up in our circular economy. But also the non-hazardous waste, as well as the stony fraction, of course. is followed up in the system. Within the end, we want less hazardous waste materials to end up in the environment, of course, to get at the end a very pure stony fraction, so quality can be assured. We can give quality assurance to the crusher. The role of Traceability in the system, because we have those different steps, the demolition works, they are ongoing, etc. What is the role of Traceability? Well, our first role is we have the pre-demolition inventory. We want a high-quality pre-demolition inventory, so we will perform a quality check on this inventory, on this waste audit. During the whole process, we will do quality checks on the removal of the hazardous waste, not only by desk work, but also by site visit in collaboration with experts we have trained. And at the end, we all do this quality management to improve quality and establish the trust and promote recycling and upcycling, of course. This is just a general overview. I only had 15 minutes to explain the system, they said. So I cannot go into detail of the whole system. So the general thing is we start with the pre-demolition inventory. We know what waste is inside the building, and then we follow up on what happens to those different streams. Of course, the traceability is more than what I here just quickly tell you. We've written down the different steps of the procedure and the conditions to go from one step to the other. They're written down in standard procedures. They were developed in a HISER project. This is a very general standard procedure, and you have to adapt it. If you want to implement such a system in your country, you have to adapt it, of course, to the regulation, to the specifications of the country or the region you're working in. So that is what we did. This system, this is the flow diagram of it. If you want to know more about it, I think the results of the HISER project are available to public. We adapted the general basis we created in HISER. We adapted it to the region of Flanders, to the legislation regulations in place. And these standard procedures, to give you the state of play of Traceability, were approved by our minister already February 2017. And we became the first recognized construction and demolition waste management organization in Flanders, August 2017. The acceptance policy, the change that was made for crushers, acceptance, low risk and high risk, is already in place. And this system was implemented and is ongoing. We are actually doing what we worked out in this project. So Traceability is performing quality checks on pre-demolition inventories, is following up on selective demolition process, and is writing out those certificates of selective demolition. This was made possible, of course, because our regulation and our specific conditions in this region were in place for such a system. There was a need for this system. It's as I said, it's not a mandatory system. You're not obliged to perform a selective demolition. You're not obliged to follow the traceability system. As I said, there is the financial incentive. But the first step in the system, the pre-demolition audit, that one is since 2009 already mandatory in Flanders, but it was not enforced by law. It was all in this legislation. It needs to be present. You need a pre-demolition audit before you start the works, but it's not that anything happened if you do not have the document. But now they made it possible to enforce it by law, as they linked it to the environmental permit, which make it possible. This is the first step into the system, so people will find quicker the way to the traceability system, to have in the end process the waste, the stony fraction, at a lower cost. So that is a state of play concerning Traceability. We're actually doing what we have written out. And this is with a focus on the stony fraction. But of course, the whole system can be expanded to other materials, as there is with other recycling companies other than crushers or production plants. They also, if they want to recycle certain fractions of gypsum, PVC for instance, they also need quality assurance. So the system can be expanded and adapted given the material you want to give quality assurance on. So we are exploring there in which way we can adapt the system for other fractions. We're also in close collaboration with recycling companies and other production plants, are looking in a way on developing hubs, because the transportation costs, a stony fraction that is usually present in high numbers, but other fractions like PVC, like gypsum, are usually in small amounts. So transportation costs can be high if you want to transport it to a certain recycling facility. So there we are looking at a way if you can locally collect those fractions and then make bulk transport of it to recycling facilities, the transportation and your logistic cost can be diminished. So that's what we're looking into now. We are also working together with Recupel, which is responsible for the collection of electronic waste, to exploit the system as well for their use. And the whole traceability system, that's the last point, the urban mining thing. We have developed an online application to make the traceability system work, to input the data of the pre-demolition audit, and of course, during the demolition works, fill in the quantities that came out, the destination of the waste. Well, we have in this way we are creating a database with lots of information of materials present not only in our buildings but in our cities, and then our cities can be seen as an urban mine that can be exploited, and this gives us important information on expected quantities, and thus information for where are recycling plants needed. Where should they be located? Which quantities can they expect? Data they usually lack now for developing new recycling possibilities. So I think that was my presentation, yes. I hope it was clear. I can explain it very perfectly in Dutch. In English it's a little bit more difficult. But if you want more information on it, we have a website. It's in Dutch, of course. We're also gladly to help. There are the deliverables from the HISER project, which are for everybody to read, of course. But are there any questions? No. Nice. Okay, no, that was too fast. Yes, please. Yes, she's gonna. Sorry.
It's a very good system.
Thank you.
I'm really impressed. But how about the cost?
Yeah.
When can it
The cost
pay
of
off?
the system. So the cost of the system, there is a cost, of course. There is a fee to become member of Tracemat. Contractors, experts, crushers need to be a member to be able to work in the system. There is a cost for the quality checks we do. But the cost of the system has been kept very much under the price that you would pay if you do nothing, and if you just transport your stones, your stony material to the crusher as high-risk waste. So the cost is like, it increased the cost for the demolition with €1.5 to €1 a ton stony material. So the cost was kept very much limited, yes. And it depends on the type of work. For big buildings, the cost is even under the €0.5 a ton. When you go to smaller buildings, dwellings, just for the dwellings, yeah, there it goes to like more 1 to 3 euros a ton. For infrastructural works, because it also is stones also come from infrastructural works, there the cost is also €0.5 a ton, more than it used to be. So the cost is kept quite low. Thanks. There was another question?
My question is regarding the access to the database. Is it also covered with the fee to join Tracemat, or?
No, so the database, as an expert inputs, for instance, data from his pre-demolition inventory in our system, but it's not accessible for everyone, of course. He can see the data, and we gather all the data together, so then you get the information of cities and stuff. This is only accessible now by Tracimat, but can be, and there was already interest from other parties to explore the database because it will hold lots of information on materials and expected quantities, but it's not accessible for everybody, of course.
Is there a communication plan to invite interested partners? I mean, interested institutions?
To collaborate with Tracimat?
Or to have a look on the information and benefit from the information that is already there to help planning better demolitions?
We are now, I know there is the question already came from the Building Research Institute in Belgium, WTCB, BBRI, all the acronyms, to see how they can exploit the database, but those conversations are just ongoing, and if there is an interest of other parties, we should look in a way how to communicate and make it available, I think.
Thank you.
Vincent Bazullo, European Commission, DG GROW. You insisted on confidence, quality and markets, and indeed, as such, you also inspired with your colleague from OVAM the development of a EU C&D waste management protocol. In your presentation, you insisted on the pre-demolition audit, you insisted on sorting materials on the demolition sites, and the traceability during these operations until the recycling plant. Yeah. I'm not sure I've got the point regarding the downstream. Are you tracing the materials in the downstream, which means until the use, the location where the recycled secondary material is used?
No, so our task stops at the gate of the crusher. At the gate of the crusher, here in Flanders, we have certification organizations, CoPro, Certipro, that take our task from there on. So they are the ones doing quality controls and tests, analysis on the recycled aggregates, and then there is the follow-up till the end use. It's not in a database, I don't think, but we stop at the gate, and then other independent organizations take over, actually. So we follow up till the recycling plant, or sometimes a sorter. So that's where we stop. We stop at that time, and then somebody else takes over to trace until the end use.
Brian James, UEPG. It's more a personal question than anything else, but considering we've just had a presentation about BIM, how does your system integrate with BIM? Because it's all the same information.
Well, the same principles for the pre-demolition inventory that they applied in their BIM are also accounted for here. BIM is a way to, or the BIM selective demolition that was developed, is a way to make measurements more quickly, etc. So there is an integration between the two, but the market is of course not ready for the BIM tool. So now measurements are done on the field, of course, by actually measuring the size of the buildings, and so making expected quantities for the different materials. But all the principles we have put in there can be integrated in the BIM, of course, or are already integrated in the BIM. So it's another way of inventory the building. So we do it now on paper, by hand, but then in the future it should be made possible to do it even more quickly with a BIM tool. Yeah.
So in the future, will there be one system that the contractor has to follow, or two?
No, the system stays the same. The start of the system is a pre-demolition inventory, and if you make it by hand or by BIM, as long as the things that should be in there on quantities, location, etc., which is in the BIM, as well as if you do it in a report by hand, because we have some procedures on it, that doesn't matter for us. There will be a quality check, whether it's on the BIM or whether it's on the real report. That stays the same. The rest of the system stays the same. You should see it actually as a big Excel file with expected different materials, expected quantities, and during the whole procedure, it's additional information on quantities set free and delivered at a certain destination, the destination also included in the Excel. That's actually the system seen through an Excel file. So that's how it should be seen. So it doesn't matter if you make the demolition inventory by BIM or not. It's the first step, and the rest stays the same. So it's one system. Okay. No more questions?